This is an Airbus A300, operating as Indian Airlines Flight IC-814. On the afternoon of December 24, 1999, it departed Kathmandu for New Delhi. The cabin was carrying 176 passengers and 15 crew members, most of them expecting a completely routine flight home for the holidays. But shortly after entering Indian airspace, the flight was hijacked. 5 men, operating under code names like Burger and Doctor, stood up, drew concealed firearms and grenades, and seized both the cabin and the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sharan was held at gunpoint and ordered to divert the plane west. Under immense pressure, he managed to discreetly adjust the aircraft's transponder, sending a silent alert to Indian Air Traffic Control that his plane had been commandeered. The hijackers didn't want a ransom from the airline. They demanded to be flown across the border into Pakistan, instantly elevating a domestic aviation emergency into an international hostage crisis. In New Delhi, the response was marked by severe systemic failure. The central government's crisis management group received the alert, but they failed to convene an emergency meeting. Crucially, they also failed to immediately notify India's primary intelligence agencies, like RAW. This communication breakdown went all the way to the top. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee remained completely unaware of the crisis until nearly an hour after the plane had been taken. Meanwhile, Captain Sharan was receiving zero instructions or support from his own government. The bureaucratic paralysis in New Delhi created a complete power vacuum. With authorities frozen, the 191 people aboard IC-814 were left entirely at the mercy of the 5 men holding the guns. Pakistani air traffic control flatly refused to let the Indian plane enter their airspace. With the fuel tanks practically empty, the hijackers had no choice but to let Captain Sharan land the plane in Amritsar, India. This handed the Indian government their single best opportunity to end the crisis on their own soil. Delhi's crisis management group realized their elite National Security Guard commandos were still 400 kilometers away. Their solution was to order the local Punjab police to stall the refueling process and keep the plane grounded until the military could arrive. The local authorities attempted a clumsy blockade. A heavy fuel truck was dispatched, speeding directly toward the nose of the aircraft, only to violently slam on its brakes right in front of the plane. The sudden, aggressive movement terrified the hijackers. Convinced an assault was underway, they panicked. In the chaos, they fatally stabbed a 25-year-old passenger named Rupin Katyal, put a gun to Captain Sharan's head, and forced him to take off immediately without a drop of new fuel. That botched stalling tactic erased India's only physical leverage. The plane climbed back into the sky, leaving Indian jurisdiction for good. This animated map tracks where they went next. Captain Sharan flew back toward Lahore, Pakistan, but air traffic control shut off the runway lights to prevent a landing. It was only when Sharan warned them the plane was about to crash directly into the city center that Pakistan finally allowed them to touch down. Lahore provided the bare minimum amount of fuel and immediately forced the aircraft to leave. The plane pushed south across the Arabian Sea, eventually landing at a military airbase in Dubai. The United Arab Emirates maintained a strict neutrality. They negotiated the release of 27 hostages and allowed the removal of Rupin Katyal's body, but they explicitly denied India's request to send in military commandos to storm the plane. With no safe haven, the hijackers forced a final flight into Kandahar, Afghanistan. At the time, Afghanistan was controlled by the Taliban, a regime the Indian government did not officially recognize. At Kandahar International Airport, heavily armed Taliban fighters immediately surrounded the aircraft. They claimed to be acting as neutral mediators, but their military cordon effectively boxed the plane in, blocking any rescue operation by Indian special forces. By bouncing the plane between uncooperative and openly hostile nations, the hijackers had engineered a perfect geographic shield. The Indian military was completely locked out. The ensuing investigation revealed exactly who India was up against. The 5 hijackers were members of Harkat-ul-Mujahideen, a Pakistan-based terror group, and their operation was heavily backed by Dawood Ibrahim's vast criminal syndicate. That syndicate had exploited glaring security gaps at Kathmandu's Tribhuvan International Airport. Using fake passports and insider connections, they easily smuggled the assault rifles and grenades directly onto the commercial airliner. IC-814 was a highly coordinated military operation. It utilized transnational criminal logistics to bypass airport security and strike directly at the Indian state. Safely parked in Kandahar, the hijackers issued their absolute demands. They wanted $200 million, the exultant body of a slain militant commander, and the immediate release of 36 terrorists held in Indian prisons. Back in India, the public response was explosive. Sensational, around-the-clock media coverage fueled widespread panic. Desperate, grieving families took to the streets, clashing with police and physically interrupting government press briefings to demand the safe return of their relatives. Bowing to this immense domestic pressure, the government abandoned its hardline stance. They dispatched a negotiation team to Kandahar, a process eventually overseen in person by External Affairs Minister Jaswant Singh. India was trapped in a geopolitical vice. They couldn't launch a military strike because the Taliban was guarding the plane, and they couldn't stall negotiations because domestic outrage at home was threatening to boil over. The Indian delegation managed to negotiate the demands down, dropping the money and the militant's body. But to save the passengers, they ultimately surrendered to releasing 3 hand-picked, highly dangerous terrorists from Indian prisons. Among the 3 was Maulana Masood Azhar. His release would prove devastating, as he would go on to found Jaish-e-Mohammed, a terror group responsible for decades of deadly attacks across India. On December 31st, the exchange was made. The hostages were finally allowed to leave the freezing cabin. In return, the Taliban provided a safe, armed military escort, driving the 5 hijackers and the 3 freed terrorists directly to the Pakistani border. The Indian state brought 190 of its citizens home alive, but the catastrophic bureaucratic delays on the tarmac in Amritsar forced a humiliating diplomatic surrender, one that armed and emboldened regional terrorist networks for the next 20 years.